I like this.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Fridays at 5. I'm Karen Taylor of the Color Vowel Chart, here with some familiar faces and some new faces and names. We welcome everybody. This is our public sort of weekly gathering where we touch on different themes each week. We started a little over a year ago during the pandemic when Jennifer had a great idea. So everybody say hi to Jennifer. She had a great idea that basically we were all stuck in our homes needing to be safe. And she recognized, we're all going to need ways to be human with one another, to exchange ideas, to solve problems, and to share new ideas. So we've been getting together pretty much every Friday now since about March 24th, something like that, of 2020. You'll have the exact date, I'm sure, at some point. But don't go off and find it, Jennifer, if you don't have it. In any case, we started off with a lot of technology because we all had to shift to online teaching, and we still touch on a lot of technology for teaching. And so if you're interested in our past episodes, we do have a YouTube channel with a place where you can subscribe to that playlist or just look at that playlist. And we'll put that in the chat for you as a link. Okay. And so sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's Ask the Linguist with Dr. Barr. So I'd like to draw attention to Dr. Barr in the room. Say hello. Yeah. So Fridays at 5 on every fourth Friday is Ask the Linguist. And next week will be a session of Ask the Linguist. You can bring in your questions. You can send them in to us at colorvowel.com. Any kind of tool you use to reach us is going to reach us there. You can reach us through our website, of course. Okay. A couple of just announcements. We do have a couple more Fridays at 5 lined up. We have some exciting themes like, how do I look? That's going to be one that I know a lot of folks are interested in. It's not how I look, but how do you look on camera? And what tools can we use to look our best for students to engage with us the most? So that's coming up on the 11th, I believe, of May. Next week is Ask the Linguist. And so we'll be sending you these notifications about upcoming themes. Okay. Today is our first podcast. We're excited about that. We'll be getting to it very shortly. But I also wanted to share with you a new opportunity or a new resource we're pretty excited about, kind of a fun resource. And that is, we now have a Redbubble store. If you've never heard of Redbubble, it's merch. So we have Color Vowel merch now. So if you ever wanted to walk around with a Color Vowel chart on some kind of an accessory, you now can. And this is what it looks like. So this is Redbubble. Here's the link. I'll be putting that into the chat for you. We love the merch store because, I'll tell you why, because they can ship internationally. That's why. So if you take a look in our store, and I'll put that right now that I found the chat. Here it is, everyone. Boom. You can go to that link. And if you are outside the United States and have been wondering, when you can order some version of the chart, we not only have these fun apparel items that aren't the chart, but we do have the chart down below on notebooks and so forth, including, by the way, the Commonwealth Color Vowel chart. For those of you who have been interested in that. So we have lots of different options. You can browse, get a poster with the images on it, all kinds of things that are available for drop ship to your country, your location. Okay. So that's just really exciting for us. And you'll be seeing more of this in the future. Okay. What else? I don't know. Here's that podcast we've been talking about. So a few weeks ago, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, I started walking a lot. I started walking for exercise to regain, some of the health that I felt I had lost during pandemic. And maybe some others feel the same way I do. We're all trying our best. So when I started walking, I got, after a while, just a bit bored. and I thought, well, I should listen to something, so I started listening to Hamilton. Anybody fan of Hamilton? No Hamilton fans? Okay, great music for walking to, just want to say. But then I started thinking, I want to do something with my mind while I walk. So I looked into podcasts. And last week we met here in Friday at 5, and we explored, useful apps for listening to podcasts. essentially radio shows that we want to hear asynchronously. And so we did that last week, and we found Hidden Brain, which is a podcast that I'm particularly fond of. And so, when I was listening, I came across this particular episode that is today's topic, and that is one head, two brains. And I found it just so intriguing personally, but also professionally. And I thought, I wonder if other people feel this way. So I'll start just by, I want to bring up some of the recordings as we talk, but I want to just start with reactions for those who have gotten a chance to listen to it. And if you haven't listened to it yet, we're going to put that link in the chat for you. It's also in the email that you may have received from us shortly ago. But I think we could all gain from a conversation, even if you haven't yet listened, and then you can go listen afterward. So I'll open up the floor and just ask, I know I'm excited. Did anybody else find it intriguing the way I did? Yeah. And we can open up the mic at this point.
Cool stuff.
Lots of cool stuff.
So my mother had a stroke, and it hit her on the right side of the brain. So she was paralyzed on the left. And this is a person who was always a global sort of thinker. And she just like she became somebody I didn't even recognize. And all of the stuff he talked about, the paranoia, it had, you can't be right. It has to be this way. Like all of that was there. I mean, it was just, and I had listened to this back, I think when this thing first came out, or my brother and I listened to it together, and we said, oh my God, it's just like all here. So it was just that struck me, and it's just struck me again as I was listening to it, just re-listening to it. And what we learned with my mother with her stroke is that there's so much about the brain that we really just don't know. They didn't know, it's just constantly evolving, and we're learning so much, about it. Even though this right brain, left brain, I do remember it from the 60s. I was in high school, and I remember scientists coming in to talk to us about it. But it's nothing like what we know, now.
Anna, how long ago was this that your mother had the stroke?
1970s. Oh, it's been about 25 years.
Right. Yeah. So
she's died now, but
that's about when my mother had her brain tumor, and it was on the right side. And so I noticed some very similar things with. I didn't recognize her as a person because the emotional area of the right side of the brain had been disrupted, and it was so the personality. The person that she was, I didn't recognize. And of course she was a musician, and so it also removed her ability to do music, which was horrible.
Yeah.
Well, let me play. I have sort of identified a couple of things for us to focus on as we bring these themes. The theme of stroke comes up a lot, of course, because we know that a lot of good research has come out of looking into what stroke patients can and can't do after a stroke and how they recover, or after any kind of brain injury for that matter. But it had me thinking a lot about, I wish they would talk about some other things. Like I wanted to know what it had to do with maybe personalities that might be more, I still buy a bit into that, like, are you left-brained or right-brained? And I know that that's now debunked according to what I listen to here. But I think about people and I think, well, gosh, that person's very left-brained. And so I kind of wonder what to do with that. So
did it remind you, do you know Myers-Briggs?
Yes, it made me think a lot of
Myers-Briggs. Absolutely, which is also on some level been debunked. But, I just find a lot of Myers-Briggs still counts. I mean, it still works,
yes.
Even though it's been sort of debunked.
Yeah. Well, I always think like of the, I listened to another broadcast from the BBC about film review, and the reviewer, sometimes he gets stuck on something. And I'm like, it's like it's his personality and he won't give it up, He still thinks Sony today, they talk for like 5 or 6 minutes on radio time, which is a lot, about, he called it Sony, And he's like, no one's ever said Sony. The name of the company is Sony, and he had people from Japan write in and say, no, it's Sony. And he's like, still not giving it up. He's just like, no, it's this. It's really interesting after watching that broadcast, listening to that. It's really interesting. Piecing it just makes you wonder, what's going on here.
And it also had me thinking about, I'll sort of share the personal stuff for me. It was autism. I thought a lot about autism as I listened to this podcast, wondering, I have a child on the spectrum, and I think, well, some of this really made me think about, that behavior, and other of it really thought about the right brain stuff he was saying. And then I just kind of gave it up. I thought, well, maybe it has nothing to bear, but it did have me looking through the lens that is most, that I pick up the most often. And so that's just so many things I wanted to unpack and think about while I'm listening. And I've now listened to it 3 or 4 times. So let me play a little clip that will, I think, find something for everybody. This is toward the beginning, that just sort of gets at a different way of looking at the brain from that conventional, the right brain is the creative side, and the left brain is the thinking side. So this is just that short clip, and then we can talk some more.
Reason is in one quadrant, emotion.
Can you hear that okay? Or shall I'm going to go ahead and
That's good. That was very
That
good.
was fine.
Okay, great. And I'll optimize even so. So let's do that. Here we go. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Here we go.
In another. Memory is over here. Imagination there. For a long time, the popular representations of hemispheric differences focused on what different parts of the brain do. Ian says what really distinguishes the hemispheres is not what they do, but how they do the same things differently.
The reason that we got things wrong, in my view, is that we were looking at simply the functions as we saw them and divided them up in much the way that we would if we thought about a machine. This part of the machine does this, this part of the machine does that. And if you, instead of using the machine model, use the model of this is part of a human being, a person, you would ask a slightly different question, which is not just what does it do, but how does it do it? And that turns out to be a profoundly important question when looking at the hemispheres, because they are both involved in doing everything. But there is a difference. It's that quite consistently, each hemisphere does all these things in a totally different way, with a different kind of spirit towards a different end, if you like to put it that way.
So I found that particularly intriguing about language education. That's when I started thinking about the teaching of spoken English, and how a lot of what we've been doing here in Colorval is we look at a textbook and we think, how do we bring that into the classroom in a way that really is true to the nature of spoken English, rather than looking in the book, how do you bring it to life? And I started to think about the book as the description of the left brain, that it's these that it's looking at it in these separate pieces. But that if we take it up into the classroom, maybe we're putting it in the right brain. So that was just, I kind of wondered, any thoughts about that? Did anybody else think about language teaching while listening to this?
Yeah, actually, with my students, you could have pronunciation books or Judy Gilbert, and it's very much that way, bump, 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 But, I brought up I said, listen to this on Forvo, because we were doing like stress. And they were like, where it's stress in the word and the syllable stress. And, I played on Forvo, I played Renaissance, and then I played the British version. I go, okay, where is it now? Is that the same sound? Is that the same color? And it was really interesting. They really connected with it because it was real. It was right there. And I go, okay, where is it? And do it with your hand, and where is it and what's happening? And it makes it much more, it's a very different experience. So.
I think it's really apparent in the way we approach grammar. This drives me crazy, like all these really discrete pieces of the grammar that, they have a big fat grammar book they run through for years. And then I teach at the advanced level, they come to me and they can't write a sentence. And they can tell you all the grammar information. Like they know more grammar than I do. but they can't, like, they don't have any sense of what the purpose is and where we're going with it. And, you know, they just have all this discrete little pieces of information. Like
Yeah.
there's
They
no,
know all the rules.
yeah, it's all systemic.
The analytic rules, I guess I
Yeah.
should say, not the unspoken rules.
I did that, and I had that happen too with me. Like they would, I would often, I would have students really stuck in all these rules of grammar, and I'd say, okay, what's the difference? I'm going to the party on Saturday. I'm going to go to the party on Saturday. And they would spend like 10 minutes and just thinking, and they're like, this one is totally different. And, you know, they'd come up with all kinds of reasoning. It was really interesting. Yeah.
So I think that whole, you know, like just getting into a more right brain, like we need more of that right brain thinking in terms of even just how we approach it, because the language is not like a bunch of little pieces. It's a living thing. Like, and so I think we need to see it that way a little bit more. Like we need to see that it's the forest. It's not all the little trees.
Yeah. Well, let's listen to the forest, if you will. I'm going to come back to this. What we're listening to is Shankar Vedantam is the host, and Ian, oh, help me out. I just had that little blank. Ian McGilchrist is the researcher, the brain research psychiatrist, who's written this book called The Master and His Emissary. So that's who you're listening to. He's about to give us a metaphor, which is that forest and the trees, only with music. So let me share that, and we can continue that conversation.
Ian believes the brain is divided into two hemispheres so that it can produce two different views of reality. One of the hemispheres, the right, focuses on the big picture. The left focuses on details. Both are essential. If you can't see the big picture, you don't understand what you're doing. If you can't home in on the details, you can't accomplish the simplest tasks. This fundamental difference in orientation turns out to have profound consequences for everything the two hemispheres do. Ian uses the example of learning a piece of music to explain how this works.
Imagine you are attracted to a piece of music and you try playing it as a whole and you love it. But you realize that there are bits that you're not getting right. So you know you need to practice your fingering at bar 18. And when you're taking it apart, you realize, oh, here we move into the subdominant. At this point, we're moving back to the dominant. You understand a whole lot of details, which are fine. You need to do the work and you need to do the analysis. But when you come to play the piece, you must put all that out of your mind. Otherwise, you won't be able to play at all.
There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, are we going to take that right over and say that's true of speaking a second language at least, or maybe
That was the part that
first?
I liked the best about this podcast was his analogy between learning a piece of music, breaking it down and analyzing it, taking it slow. Other things you can do with music is back building, you know, so the same kinds of things that you use in practicing music, you can do in pronunciation, but you can't be thinking about all those things while you're actually playing, or you won't be able to perform. So how do you get from looking at the individual parts into the larger whole? And the way he described it was you do it very slowly, and then somehow your brain, insert what do they call it? Insert epiphany here. Somehow your brain gets from A to Z and turns it into a coherent whole. But how you get from here to there is still not obvious. But yet we know that taking it apart is one way of getting better at doing the whole thing.
Well, speaking of parts and wholes, I was thinking about today and just how, here, in fact, I'm looking at all these parts in this, I'm looking at gallery view right now, so I can see, our 20 or so parts. And sometimes we know that if we take the parts apart and then we bring them back together, we can appreciate the whole in a new way. So that's my preface to saying, I'd like to put us in breakout rooms for a couple minutes to explore this more deeply, and also to give us a chance to talk in smaller groups for a moment, to see if maybe we also come back and have more to say about this. And so the question I'm going to raise is what, let's go with I'm going to go with the presupposition that we've all seen and done the parts, right? We can go to the parts in the books, we can go step by step, but what have you done as a teacher or as a second language speaker yourself to bring the whole to the table, right? To experience the whole. One that comes to mind is, there's something to be said for going out into the target society where you want to speak this language and have 1 or 2 glasses of wine, but not too much, because research was done on this, that would be a way of kind of saying, I'm going to go for the whole by just loosening up a little bit and talking to people at this bar or this restaurant, what have you. Now, I just use that as just a way to get started. But what kinds of things have we been doing in our classrooms to bring the whole into perspective? And I was just thinking of maybe 2 or 3 minutes on that in a couple of groups. And I realize, today we have all kinds of people in our community, ranging from English language teachers to English language learners. And I continue to maintain we all belong in the same room for a lot of what we do. There's no need for that division. And so I only name those different roles so that you can know you're absolutely welcome, regardless of whether you're one or the other or both or neither. You're here for some reason that had to do with today's topic. So we're just really excited to have everybody here, and I thank you for being here. So if we will, I'll just break out into rooms here. We're going to break out into probably maybe 4 little rooms with various people in them. And it'll be 2 minutes of what kind of big picture or whole brain thinking activities do you use to help learners put the pieces together? It's that pretty much that simple. And the answers, of course, can be any variety. There's nothing wrong. Okay. And then we'll come back and share out just a little bit before we dive back into hidden brain. Any final questions before we break out? Okay. Thank you. Here we go. Wow.
Yeah, I thought so.
Wow. In that very short time, you had such a profound conversation. Fabulous. Other themes that came up. I can't, I didn't get to visit all the rooms. And so I'd love a little report out. What are some ways that
now told us that she teaches English and she teaches music, both the same way. So starting with the whole and then getting into the parts. Is that correct now? Am I summarizing?
Yes.
accurately?
Thank you.
other activities, ideas, things that you brainstormed, ways that you bring the whole of language, especially spoken language, or maybe new ideas that you're thinking of now. Maybe that was the generator, and now the ideas are coming too.
Well, I work, among other places, in a college EAP program, and I'm so rubric bound, which makes me crazy. I hate being rubric bound. And not only am I rubric bound, but we share, like we have to agree on rubrics, which is a whole other thing. And I'm convinced that students, at least where I work, never even look at a rubric, like they don't have any clue about it. So I think we get very pedantic in how we assess our students, and we don't look at the big picture of how well they did in that debate at making themselves understood and so on. We get into all this nitty gritty of, oh, they got this grammar wrong and that grammar wrong. And it reduces maybe a potentially good experience they might have had to these individual parts that they didn't do well enough. And I find that must be demoralizing. And I for me, I don't like to reduce it that way, but I'm kind of forced to.
I wonder if the balance to that is so long as we teach for the big and then assess for the compartmentalized. I mean, it's very difficult to assess holistically in a consistent and efficient way, right? If we try to do the whole, it ends up not being very feasible. It takes a lot of time, and it might not be consistent from rater to rater. But I mean, I've thought a lot about that too, Suzanne, that, you know, so long as we don't let the rubric turn into the lesson,
Right.
that's where I find myself feeling really disturbed, is when the lesson itself is prepping people to succeed on each of the little pieces. I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but Jody?
I think the rubric has to include the overarching goal. Is like, and it has to come not just from the teacher, but it has to be a self-assessment and that of the peers. So how well do you feel you defended your point in the debate, and this is how your other classmates feel like you did, and just that has to be part of the rubric. It can't be just little pieces. It was how successful was the communication, and what was the goal of the communication, and was that met?
Thank you.
I think the important point is that you need both, because the flip side of this is that, again, I teach writing. So like, then you would say the holistic one was, oh, this is a 5 essay. This is a 4 essay. Well, that's meaningless, absolutely meaningless to the students. So then I had to like take apart these 5s and 4s and say, well, what makes a 5? What makes a 4? So I have all the little details, but so in terms of feedback, but the issue is that we still need to do both. Is it a 5 essay or is it a 4 essay? And what might make it, you know, those things. So it's the criteria, but in the end, it's the result that matters. So you have to do both. You can't just do one or the other.
I thought on the podcast, it was really interesting that Ian, what's his name? Ian
McClellan.
McClellan
Yeah.
said, oh yes, of course you do need both. It's not that, you know, the right brain is better, but then he said, but I get all these nitpicking criticisms about my work. I'm thinking, nitpicking, that you know, dissing the detailed work of the left brain critics who say, but I have a counterexample here, and here's a place where your thing doesn't work. He says, yes, I want them to bring it up, but then he says, well, they're nitpicking, so you know they're missing the whole picture, which I thought was an interesting attitude he had.
Yeah, well, it's also very self-referent. I mean, it's a solipsistic, right? This is all about parts and whole. And then he says, well, those part people can't get my whole. That's great. His last name is McGilchrist, by the way. I was wrong about that. So Ian McGilchrist.
Can I make one more point, Karen? That
Sure.
As a performer and a musician, you practice, and you break things down into parts and repeat them and do all these things that were discussed in that. But at the end of the day, or at the end of the practice, when you step on the stage and you do the performance, you're not hoping and expecting people are going to hear every potential wrong note or phrase that wasn't exactly whatever. You want them to take away the emotional experience and the overall. And I feel like sometimes that's missing when a student does perform something well in their English studies and they get ripped apart with, you know, all the little stuff. So the big picture, we've talked about it, but I'm just saying, if you compare it to a performance, I'd rather, and I've moved many people, I'd rather move a person with my performance and have a little technical glitch than, you know, have everything technically perfect with no emotion.
If you could say something about that. That I had a speaking and listening class for like many years at Montgomery College, and it was always based around stories, and stories in songs, connecting them with the songs, but having them tell stories, creating stories in small groups, and then my other one would be with a rubric, you know, my other grade, but I would have some of that, but I would have really creating stories and having them feel very comfortable speaking. And using getting the whole message across, the whole idea, what their story was about. And that was, I found, very, very helpful, because they often came in and they were afraid to speak, just making a mistake, right? You know, but telling a story, they're like, oh, well, our group, we told our story. And therefore, you know, everyone found it interesting. I mean, so that was very, very helpful and useful. Yeah, I mean, it was just fun too. Yeah.
And I think, Suzanne, the other thing that, like what you were talking about, I think he brought it up too, is like the fastest way to ruin a good book is to go to a 10th grade English class. Oh my God. The stuff that they talk about, and like, it's just mind boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I could have been an English major, but for that,
Yeah.
I ran to the social work department instead. And we still do it. They still do it. It's just.
Jody, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so maybe I have a slightly different view in that most of my work right now is with international graduate students and through a tutoring program. So it's not a regular class. It's a self-selected drop-in, well, they make an appointment, but a tutoring program. And I found it extremely helpful to do some of those deep dives into the details. And so for most of my students, what they're experiencing is only the whole. They're doing life in English, and they're looking at the big picture all the time, and they're never thinking about stress and vowels, and they're just doing their best to communicate. And so when they come to me, for most of them, it's the first time anyone has ever said, well, in English, there's word stress, there's a focus word, there's a thought group. And for most of them, this is just so eye-opening that like, oh, there's these like things that I can work on. And for me, my intonation is good, but my stress is off. And for them to like be aware of these pieces has been really, really eye-opening for people. So I don't want to go so far in the other direction that we say like these are bad, but I really try in every session to sort of jump between. So we'll start with just like some conversation, we'll listen to kind of the patterns that they're using. Then we might say, okay, here's an area where I see that you could use a little help. Let me explain it to you. Let's do a couple discrete practices, and then let's go back and maybe do that original conversation over, so that we're not like, it really struck me in the podcast when he said you can't focus on everything at once. And I feel like with my students, that's such a huge part of what we're doing. Like they're always trying to focus on everything. And when we take a minute and just say like, let's only worry about syllable stress for the next 5 minutes, and then they can just really zero in on that. And then we say, okay, now let's open it up and just talk, but try to focus on syllable stress. And I think it's a really effective pattern, just like the podcast was saying, to kind of go small picture, big picture, small picture, big picture, where they're getting a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's your brain gym, left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. It works really well. I like, I was going to mention what you just brought up, Jody, was with the more advanced speakers. Think about fossilization. With fossilization, just communication is just not enough because they're not aware of the errors that they're making. You have to dig deep into the individual pieces, and it's painful sometimes, but it's if they want to improve, that's what has to happen. And that's a lot harder on them, I think, on the people who have been communicating all along and not realizing once they have to hit higher standard or hit those rubrics, they have to go back and redo the way they make their interlanguage, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Jody blew my mind. I had little tears too. No, because I really like it's interesting because I think so much, as you can imagine, I spend a lot of time thinking about stress and vowel quality, but maybe so much so that is my whole. And I hadn't really thought of it. Of course, it's the parts. You just said it's absolutely accurate. It is the parts, but maybe what I want to explore or ask this question out loud is, if you focus so deeply on a whole that can pay off on the big picture, how can I ask this? I I'm curious about generalization, and this is for a question for Dr. Barr. That when, and by the way, we had a conversation. There's a word in Japanese now of the conversation before the conversation, the meeting before the meeting. I don't know if you can tell me that word, but I remember a colleague telling me about this idea, the meeting before the meeting. Anyway, Robin and I had a meeting before the meeting, and we already knew this is such a rich topic that we could have this more social teacher-based discussion today. And next week, we'll continue this with a discussion more about the brain in depth. And
Oh
Dr.
God,
Barr,
you're going to really have fun with next week, because
Dr. Barr brings such an incredible.
I have a whole thing about left brain, right brain that doesn't involve language at all, and I teach it in my linguistics class, and it's about art. So I'm come with your pencils next week.
We will. And so my question that maybe you'll answer a bit right now, and then let us know if you can continue it next week, is this question of generalization. If you take something, you say, I can't focus on all the parts, certainly not at the same time. And I might not be able to focus on all of the relevant parts, even in one semester, right? We can't get to it all. What if we prioritize and pick this one feature that is the center of everything we do in Color Val, and saying this one feature might seem like a part, but if you visit it often enough and meaningfully enough, it will generalize. And that's when we've had these individuals who, have come time and again. There was somebody who wrote me recently who said a student came to them and said, I now listen in color. That suddenly they're able to hear the prosody of English in this very powerful way that came from the focus on the parts. And so that's my question, has to do with this
I
corpus
think
callosum and
I think
right
you're
brain.
accessing two different things here.
Okay.
But it's an interesting question. One is you've already discovered that identifying the color vowel, that actually involves several different processes, like identifying the stressed syllable, identifying which vowel it is, lengthening the vowel, so there's at least three things going on when you think in color. So that's three parts and not just one part. Okay. But also the idea that of prioritizing the thing that'll give you the biggest bang for the buck, that's something that think of how you would do that in music. What's the most important thing when you're playing music? Well, for me, I play in an orchestra, and the most important thing when you're playing in an orchestra is not getting the notes right, but being in the right place, right? So you could have people who get all the notes right, but they're half a beat off, and that's no good, right? So but on the other hand, if you're playing by yourself, with no constraint about the rhythm, you don't have to be playing with anybody else. You can slow down on the hard parts and speed up on the easy parts, and that's why harpists are terrible to at playing with an orchestra. That's because they're used to playing by themselves. So, but that's so. What is important? What's the important part? And what do you need to concentrate on? What's going to make the most difference in that communication system setup? And if you're in a conversation, maybe having something at the tip of your tongue so you can answer a question, or you can do small talk. Or now was saying that she thinks doing small conversations at the beginning of class is one of the most important things that she does. But on the other hand, if you're what would be something that wouldn't involve, so if you're writing a paper, say, so if you're an international student and you're writing a paper, well, maybe you need to concentrate on sentence formation and grammar in that sense. So I mean, what gives you the biggest bang for the buck? What individual thing will help you the most in that particular context might differ from context to context. What do you think?
And I think the parts that you're going to concentrate on have to be related to getting your goal done better. Like that's That's how you prioritize it. So what's the one piece that's going to allow me to get the big thing done better, or, you know, or more effectively, or whatever it is. So if you're writing the paper, you're not starting with sentence structure, you're starting with communication. What's my idea? And then what's getting in the way of people understanding that idea? So it might be the sentence structure, but it might be something else. And then you go and concentrate on that one thing, but you don't start there.
But I'm not sure about the generalization question. So if I focused on sentence structure, would that improve the rest of my paper? I'm not sure about that. I don't think it would have an effect on word choice. I don't think it would have an effect on the organization of my argument.
And you would lose.
It wouldn't fix my spelling, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to reserve judgment on that claim, Karen.
Yeah, no, it's not, and it's not a claim at all. It's more a question of, is it what is happening when generalization happens? And to be clear, for anybody who's still wondering what I mean by generalization, it's when you can take, I don't know, you take a skill and then suddenly you realize it applies to all kinds of things. And I've seen that happen with stress in particular, where the generalization is that you don't just hear it in this moment or in this exercise, but suddenly it kind of flips over like an iceberg, and suddenly it's everywhere and they can't unhear it suddenly. You know, that's that it generalizes beyond.
Well, for English, stress has a huge effect on the rest of the language, and that's not necessarily the case for other languages.
Right.
Okay. So stress affects the phonological rules of consonant clusters and things like that. Stress affects the vowel length. Stress affects intonation. You know, I mean, it has a cascading effect. So if you get the stress right, then the rest of it may also follow. And if you get the stress wrong, then things are happening in the wrong place.
Yeah. Well, let me share another clip, just because we're kind of going back and forth. And this is getting a bit back to the big idea of the podcast, which hinges around this fable of the master and the emissary. And so I'm going to just play a clip from that. And this for me started to raise questions about at least in North America, or the United States in particular, because that's what I know, about education and educational systems. Just that idea of the master and the emissary. So let me play this and we can talk some more.
It has a lot of science in it, but it's also a commentary on modern industrial societies. The title of the book comes from a parable, a myth about a wise spiritual master who rules over a land. The master appoints an emissary. He's a smart messenger. His job is to carry the master's instructions to the far corners of the land.
And this emissary was bright enough, but not quite bright enough to know what it was he didn't know. And he thought, I know everything. And he thought, what does the master know? Sitting back there, seraphically smiling while I do all the hard work. And so he adopted the master's cloak, pretended to be the master. And because he didn't know what he didn't know, the result was that the community fell apart, essentially.
Ian argues that the right hemisphere of the brain is supposed to play the role of the wise master of our mental kingdom. The left hemisphere is supposed to be the emissary. Ian says we have grown infatuated with the skills of the emissary. We prize the details, but scorn the big picture. He makes an analogy about the relationship between the hemispheres.
I want to emphasize that I resist very strongly the idea that the brain is a computer. It's just nothing like a computer, actually. But in this one limited sense, the left hemisphere is a little bit like a very, very smart computer. So you know what the data that you've collected mean, but you haven't yet been able to analyze them. You put them into a machine that is just very clever at carrying out a routine. It doesn't understand. And then it spews out a result, which it also doesn't understand, but you then take back into the world where the data come from and go, I see. So that is the relationship. Your left hemisphere is busy processing things to make sure they're consistent and unpacked, but your right hemisphere is seeing everything. I'm suggesting that we have arrived at a place, not for the first time in the West, where we have slipped into listening only to what it is that the left hemisphere can tell us and discounting what the right hemisphere could have told us.
And Okay, so and it never stops, so it's hard to stop in the middle of these things. But what I found intriguing about that in terms of thinking about society and educational systems was that quote there, that we've grown infatuated with the skills of the emissary, that we're in a place where we are listening more to what the left hemisphere wants to do with data and less to what the right is. So I'm curious, does that resonate with anybody? Is sort of
Death of liberal
identifying-
arts.
I have to just say, yeah, I work in the public school system and it's testing, 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 testing. And kids don't know what it means. They don't know the scores. They don't know what the rubric means. They don't know anything about it. They're just tested on it. Did I do
I'm a
good or did I do
statistician by
bad?
training.
I
Yes,
get that all the time. How did I do? They look at their score. Is it good? Is it bad? What does that mean?
I'm a
Yeah.
statistician. There are lies, damn lies in statistics. It all
Yeah.
depends upon what the numbers mean. And the details only are important is in relation to the whole. And we have lost sight of that.
Yeah.
Where I think of it is as surface versus depth. So you have these educators who discover, wow, it's much better if you teach math this way. And here's a curriculum how you could teach math this way. And then they publish it, and then everybody's learning how to teach math in a new way, but they don't know why they're doing it. So it's all about learning the vocabulary, and it looks the same, but it doesn't work as well as the when the original inventors tried it, because the teachers don't know why they're doing it that way. I mean, it's not just the teachers I'm talking about. It's just any kind of innovation. You wind up doing what looks right. I mean, you could say the same thing about taboos and what's it called? The political correctness. So you have the veneer of political correctness, but you're not actually being less bigoted.
Mm.
Mhm.
To me, it reminded me of the whole, I mean, a more bigger thing, the whole march we have towards career preparations and away from liberal arts. So great, you can do all these jobs, but you have no context, like ethics or any, the big thinking and stuff. And that, I mean, I'm at a university, and that's alarming. Our liberal arts curriculum is just shrunk, and we have all these, like business and, very technical kinds of stuff. And just is.
I think it was in it must not have been this podcast, but another, and I can't keep them all straight anymore. But there was a reference to technology these days can go so awry of ethics, because you have people who are trained so technically that they can be working on something and not have any sense of the human implications of their work. And so they seek, this answer because they've been told to seek this, to follow this question. And then someone else comes along who has a different set of priorities and simply cherry picks those pieces. And you can end up with results that are disastrous.
I mean, like facial recognition programming, things like that. Yeah.
Right. All I'm doing is learning how to recognize the iris or what have you.
Which is actually fascinating from a cognitive point of view, right? How do we recognize faces?
Right.
But then suddenly somebody else says, oh, I can weaponize this. Yeah.
That's right.
I find this everywhere too. Is when I was at university, I was thinking of Anna there. I took like a grammar course, it was just like on the grammar and explaining it. And I took it and I said, well, I'm going to just drop in again and audit this course. And I got completely different explanations for all the grammar. It was like, wow, that's a wake up call.
Well, in terms of color val, I also think I'm sort of rounding things up because we're at the top of the hour. But if anyone spent any time with us, they know that we're this humble teacher-built company, and yet we have a global vision, which is to inform, to raise teachers up partly with phonological awareness, which we always need. All of us need to be aware of the way we speak so that we know which parts of it are the essential aspects of our speech versus the variable parts of our speech that might identify who we are, but aren't necessarily the pieces that someone else has to have. So that's part of what we do. But in part of it, in communicating that mission, we certainly run into the question of the part and the whole, I think. And just want you to know that we're always interested in ways that we can have these conversations with folks that are, interested in maybe too much in the parts. And I think we're interested in the whole. Despite now I'm all run awry because Jody just blew my mind again, where I was like parts and wholes, and to me it's all, I have to now spend some time with the concepts to figure out what's part and whole anymore. But do you have any thoughts, anyone, just about what this is that you do if you do teach with the color vowel chart and this approach? What has it done for your parts and your wholes in teaching? I thought we might just close up with a few ideas along those lines.
I've been thinking that through this conversation that the beauty of the chart for me is that it's a seamless doorway between the parts and the whole, and that you are dealing with both at the same time, and that by having students use this approach, you can meet them at any level of the part or the whole. So
Yeah, I want to translate that into suprasegmentals and segmentals. So, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, well, this is just for teaching vowels. What does it have to do with anything else? That would be a very part-oriented or segmental kind of way of looking at it. But in fact, as you said, it can be very suprasegmental. It can involve the entire phrase or thought group in terms of, because you're identifying the stress as well. So that's kind of a part whole thing, even though those are also all parts.
See, it happened to you too, Jody.
No, I just want to say,
That was beautifully said, I have to say. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I didn't realize it was so
It
big. No, but I think the way, Karen, the way that I've seen you teach the chart, like if I was someone who had just encountered the chart and had never seen you put it into action, I might look at it as completely a part thing. Just these are different sounds and they're very small details. But when I watch you teach students and teachers how to use this, and you're putting your whole body into it, and you're making it musical, and I think, just like what Jennifer said, that you're taking these parts and you're putting them into a whole. Because if you go through the chart and you say, green TE, silver pin I, that's very, a distinct piece, but that's not all you do with it. You're putting it into these big phrases, and you're giving people this more overall view on like repeating a phrase and getting it kind of automatic in your mind. And I think that's bringing it from the small piece into a larger view.
Yeah,
I agree. And I think that's why a lot of us are really clumsy at it. So we're looking at all the parts and we're trying to be as natural as you, and it does not work because we're still like thinking about all the little silly parts, like just what you did in the consonants course with us, and some of us, like Alicia, was very natural about it. And some of us, like me, just really plodding along, and like it's not natural because I can't forget it. I had to write it all down. I'm reading it to make it work. So I think Jody hit it exactly. I think that's exactly right.
Wow.
So,
I'll just mention that I think what you're referring to in the consonants course, this is a level 2 workshop we're doing right now, that I challenged the group to do something a little bit like what we do on Thursday nights, this chant like from the inside out kind of approach. And it has been fascinating to watch, and Anna did a great job, I want to say, too.
But
you ended up
not a great job.
it was a great step forward, I will say, definitely. And it feels strange to do that movement. So thank you for identifying that. Wonderful.
And some failed royally, right, Karen?
Say it again.
And some failed royally, but I'll get there.
No, You gave us a lot to talk about. It was fabulous. Well,
But
thank
that's
you, everybody.
because it required you to think in these different ways at the same time, that, you know, you have to have in mind when you're doing this back building kind of thing, that you have to have that whole phrase in mind and understand what your student's going to get out of that whole thing, and craft that final whole, but then take it down to those parts and build it. And looking at those parts in a different way than we usually do look at the whole. So it is kind of a mind bending exercise. And if you're not used to that, looking at language in these kind of convoluted ways, it is very challenging. But
I just want to finish with my coach at the gym. His name, he always gets, people get it wrong no matter how many times he says it. Is the people say Duval, and he says no, it's Duval. And I said, oh, Brown Cow Duval, and he introduces himself as Brown Cow Duval to everybody now. It's really funny.
Fabulous. Any final comments from anybody?
I just wanted to say I'm a speech therapist by training, so I have a little different perspective, but I really appreciate so much. I've been working a little bit with accent modification, so that's how I got here. But anyway, I really appreciate just having like the key words for people to anchor on. Yeah, just, you know, I find it so much helpful for them. And I also really love the cup of mustard, you know, that when you're talking about reduction of vowels, that you can kind of show them how visually, like your tongue is right in the center of your mouth, so it can go in any direction quickly that it needs to get to the next sound. And that's why we reduce our vowels, you know, so many times when they're not stressed and stuff. So I just really like that.
Oh, thank you. That 2 for 3 or 2 for 1, 3 for 1 in a cup of mustard. Wonderful. Thank
Very
you.
deep. Yeah.
Great. Hey, everybody, this is the first time we've done a pod squad. I think it's, you know, we're finding our way. We paid attention to the pod. We also walked away from the pod. We went into our breakout rooms, we came back. But if you have any ideas and want to keep doing this, let me know what you'd like to discuss. Next week, again, is our 4th Friday. It's always Ask the Linguist with Dr. Barr.
I want to continue this discussion, really, because there's a lot more to be said just from additional data, and I think that what he's talking about is true but kind of reductionist. So I want to talk about that as well. So the left brain and right brain are not monolithic. There are lots of different parts of both sides. So I think that might be something that is important for us to look at in more detail. So that's what I'd like to talk about next week. And so please bring your questions next week, and I'll try to answer the ones I know the answer to, and I'll make up something for the ones I don't.
I think part of it is, and it's interesting because Deborah, I think of him as the Deborah Tannen of the brain. I mean, it's, you know, he's somebody who can write a book that's accessible to those of us on the outside, and it might have to be reductionist in order to be that thing.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating, and the data are really startling and interesting, and yet I interpret them a different way from the way he does. So I'm interested to hear what you think.
And fascinatingly, please join us next week for Ask the Linguist. I'm hoping you got here today either through our private community in Facebook or through the email blast that we send out to anybody who's on our newsletter list. So if you have questions about how to know next week, you'll get the same notifications you got this week, but get in touch with us if you have questions. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks to Dr. Barr for, you know, she's been doing some prep already, and we'll be looking forward to next week. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.
Friday.